G'day and kia ora rugby fans. This is That Rugby Podcast, hosted by the Sports Booth. I'm your Kiwi half of this podcast, Luke, who enjoys a full trophy cabinet, running rugby, and whenever the Bledisloe comes around. With me is the Aussie mate, Husey, who loved Eddie Jones and now despises him, is used to being let down, and can't actually remember what it's like to see a Bledisloe win. Tune in for 30 minutes of no-nonsense rugby chat, a bit of Trans-Tasman banter, and maybe a few laughs, if you're lucky. Get yourself set and engaged as we kick off That Rugby Podcast. Dupont, is he just arguably the greatest player in the world now? And the only reason I'm saying that is we've seen now the French 15 side turn into what can only be described as a disaster. Whereas the French 7 side actually took out bronze in Vancouver this morning, with Dupont starting to play more and more a role in there. So the question has to be, was Dupont France? Is France no good without Dupont? Like, we've just witnessed a 13-0 draw that realistically should have been a loss if a ball doesn't fall off a tee. Yep. And Italy get there.
If the rules are followed, we'll come on to that in a minute. But I also want to say I have been a big Dupont advocate for a long time on this podcast. Right, I said last year that he was one of the most important players of the World Cup, and the question is, does France get as far as they do if Dupont doesn't play in that World Cup? I think you look at this, how this Six Nations is gone for France, and you could maybe say, well, maybe not. Maybe they don't even have a competitive quarterfinal. Maybe they don't make the quarterfinal. It is. I feel very vindicated in seeing France from last year compared to this year, and then France in the Six Nations now, of seeing, yes, this is. There's always a question of what is the greatest player and what is the most valuable player. I think those are two actually very separate things, and even what is the most talented player. Because there are some players that just transform a team, and they might not be the best player in the world. They might not even be the best player on their own team, but they are the most valuable for what they bring to their team. So I think you could very confidently say that Dupont is the most valuable player in the world because he elevates that French squad to a top 4 team in the world, to an ultra competitive side that has the ability to beat South Africa and New Zealand in test matches. Without him, France aren't the same. They're not the same team. And look, a 13-all draw against Italy, that they're lucky it's a draw. They're lucky it is only 13-13. I think goes a long way to prove that. And I think Dupont will whenever he makes his return to the 15-a-side game, will be welcomed by his teammates with the most open arms possible.
Yeah, I know, I couldn't agree more. And I just go, well, I was probably less on the train that you were on, the Dupont train, because I thought the French team were good, and I thought the French team as a team were good. I didn't think it was just Dupont. But now what I'm seeing, and I know, yes, there was a red card. I know they had a red card against Ireland, but even against Scotland, they got lucky against Scotland. They've got lucky again here. I go, they're 3 games into arguably a Six Nations. I thought they went in as pretty big favourites, hosting Ireland at home with the games that they were playing, thought that they could get a job done, and they just haven't looked like. They've looked like a shell of that team that won the World Cup. They've looked like a shell of that team that went on a winning streak and bet the All Blacks. They just don't look that. And I know Intermark's out as well. But again, there's some talented players there, and it's just not clicking. And I don't know. I've always had this question of France. I never thought they were as good as they were. But I didn't think they were this bad. I didn't think they were, succumbing to draws against Italy and absolute disaster against the Irish. So, look, there's going to be arguments now with Dupont leads this French team to a gold in Paris, which, look, I mean, it's a massive task. And it's not only because you're competing against like New Zealand teams, Fiji's. The team that Argentina are currently putting out, Argentina have won the last 3 tournaments, 7s tournaments for the men's. Like, Argentina are the team to beat at the moment on the 7 circuit. So I go, it's going to be a tough task for Dupont. It's not out of the realm of his possibility with whatever he does to escalate his teams or to lift his teams up. But yeah, look, I'm blown away by what has happened to France since he's left and what has happened to the 7s program since he's gone. But let's get on to kind of the Six Nations. There's a couple other games, but you want to talk a bit more about the Italy and the moment there with the missed penalty, my friend.
Yes. There's been a lot of media put out about this. And please step in if you see anything wrong with this here. But I believe the kick at the end of the game, it was a penalty kick. It's a penalty kick.
Correct.
Now, you're not allowed to rush penalty kicks. As far as I thought, you're not allowed to rush the penalty kicks. Even if because we had this moment a few weeks back with Wales and England, and the whole kerfuffle about when does the runner start to make his approach. And we clarified the rule on that. But that's just for goal kicks. For penalty kicks, no matter when he starts his run up or anything like that, you can't chase it down. They must be allowed to take an unobstructed kick. In addition to that, the French had a non-player on the field as well. They had a water boy on the field, which I also believe you're not allowed to do in a penalty. It's not a break in the game. It's a penalty. So, and then there was a kerfuffle to do with the shot clock as well about how much time was it taken to do the kick because the ball fell off the tee and everything like that. That last one, the clock issue, is a separate one. However, when the ball slipped off the tee, the French players started to run towards the ball. They still had a water boy on the field. For me, you should stop the clock there and restart it again once the ball is on the tee, and then the water boy has left the field. You can't be expected. You can't take your time, the legal time, off the clock for a player to take a kick when the other team is not complying with the rules. That'd be like if a French player was standing in front of the ball over the tee and the referee said, "Oh, you've got 20 seconds to kick this." It's like, well, no, there's a giant bearded Frenchman in the way. It's so for me, I feel Italy were very hard done by there. I think they were very, very hard done by, and I think the referee. This is one of those rare occasions where I would have rather have seen the referee stop proceedings and put their stamp on the game than allow things to continue the way that they were.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I've seen all the reviews and the breakdowns of it. It's hard. It's a hard point because the shot clock's relatively new. So there was a lot happening in that last minute. The ball comes off the tee. Players don't know what exactly is the rules off that, and I totally understand that. It is a front rower who's made a couple of steps. I'm not going to hide away from the fact that it's a big lad, so not a lot going on in the old top 2 inches there. So, look, I understand that. To me, and again, this might be a little bit of a controversial take, but when the clock hits 80 minutes or the penalty kick is going to go into 80 minutes, I don't think there should be a shot clock. Now, the reason I say that is we lost those moments where you sit there and you go, 80 minutes into the game, Italy have won a penalty. Oh my God, this kick's to win the game. The more time that goes on, the more pressure it is on the kicker in my mind. I just think those are those moments you want
You're not wasting any time.
No, exactly. Like the game's over no matter what. So to me, there was that. But again, I understand the counter argument to that is, well, if it's happening during the game, why not keep it during the end? I understand it, but I just think when clock hits 80 minutes, that kick, that was a moment that should have been held, and we should have been watching our TVs and glued to our televisions. It shouldn't have been the ball's come off the tee, he's got 10 seconds to get it back on and get a kick away. So that was my thing on the shot clock. For the step forward, I think, look, I understand it. Again, I think the ref will go back and go, look, in the end, a wrong decision. I don't think the French were inadvertently trying to cheat the game. Like they were only stepping forward because the ball's come off the tee, which again is not a part of the rules, but there's been, like you've said, there's been so much like this previously that there's a lot going on with rugby around those rules where I don't think French were trying to cheat the system here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it was malicious by the French. I think it was unintentional, but that's why you have the referee there to fill in those gaps in player knowledge as well, and to adjudicate it correctly. Like, I don't think the French were saying, "Oh, we'll just rush it anyway." We know we're not allowed to do it. You're right. It was a big boy. It's a they don't often come into contact with kicking situations, right? So I think it's I don't think it was malicious by the French. So I don't lay the blame with the French for this. With the water boy part of it, I feel like that's something that the coaches should know about when they can and can't send water and training personnel onto the field. And again, that's another one where the referee should have stepped in all the touchies and said, hey, that's not allowed. Again, though, I don't think it was the French being malicious, right? I don't think it was them being like, we got to get an advantage here any way we can. I think it was, it's at the end of an 80-minute game. It's tied up. You're just trying to get your players some hydration because who knows what happens off the kick. So I don't think it was malicious. I think it was just they just didn't know the rules, and then the referee didn't do their job by adjudicating it, by putting their authority on the game in a moment where they should have. It's one of the few moments that we've seen where we actually we want to hear the referee's voice in this situation.
Yeah, and it took me back to an All Blacks versus Ireland game not too long ago, 2013, I believe it was, where the All Blacks got a re-kick after Aaron Cruden does this little thing where he does steps on the spot before he goal kicks. So the Irish charged early, he missed the goal kick, and then got the chance to retake the goal kick. And as controversial as that is, it was the right decision because they charged early. And this is another moment where, as controversial as it may have been, it's the right decision. If we look back at the Melbourne Cricket Ground with Wallabies versus New Zealand, time wasting call on that. As much as it's a controversial decision, it's a correct decision. And this would have been exactly the same, in my opinion, where we would have sat there and there would have been a lot of discussion over it, and it's a big call for a ref to make, but it is the right call. But again, I'm not on the ref too much because, again, there's a lot that's happening. There's a lot, like as you've said, the refs are human too. It was an 80-minute game. I don't think he was not trying. Like, I think he was so focused on letting the kicker know, again, it came to the shot clock, hey, you've only got 10 seconds left, you've got to get a kick off, then he was focused on the French team. So, look, there was so many parts to play in that, yes, Italy deserved the second kick, but also I think there's more to the game there we can discuss about, hey, when it gets to the 80-minute mark, let them take as long as they want. Like, it's a goal kick to win the game. It shouldn't be down to a time thing now, but yeah.
Yeah, and let's also highlight, because we've been critical of Italy in the Six Nations and how they've performed, and in a week where there were actual questions in the media about does Italy belong in the Six Nations, and Ange Capuozzo was actually in the media saying, there were years where some of these other teams in the Six Nations were absolute horseshit for decades as well. We're just building. You got to give us a chance. I think it's a really strong performance to Italy to come out there and show up and really make a statement. I think there's a statement game from Italy, and I think this is, think about this. Italy could be 2-1 in the Six Nations right now, lost by 3 points to England and tied with France, right? So they've got to be, they're getting there, and arguably this should have been a win. It's hard though to it's like, in how many of these do they get? I think this is an impressive win, an impressive draw that should have been a win. But the fact that it's not a win, that's all that's going to be remembered down history. That's all that's going to show up in the record book. That
is exactly what my counter argument was. French had a red card. When you've got a man advantage for as long as they had, the counter argument has to be you have to win those games. No matter what you do, you win those games. And the fact that it's come out as a draw again, they were up against England at halftime, lost that game. I go, look, we can understand an Irish are beating everybody, so we can take that one away. But the two chances that they've had, they've blown. And if they want to be considered good enough, the thing I think about Italy at the moment is you have a Rugby World Cup that was miserable. Just about a 100-point loss to the All Blacks. you aren't just fighting for your right to stay in the Six Nations. You're fighting for people to sit there and believe you're still a Tier 1 nation. Because after that whooping in the World Cup, that's what you're fighting for. And so I sit here and I go, you had a chance to right the wrongs of what a Rugby World Cup was, and both times you've cracked under the pressure. Be it controversially this last one and against England, it's just, to me, when are Italy going to start winning those games? Like this, they've never beat France in a Six Nations game. This was their opportunity, and I'm going to say they blew it. Like, as much as you've got a man advantage, you know, you can say, oh, look, they're competitive. France haven't looked good against anyone. This has been we can make this argument now. This is a weak French team, lucky to beat Scotland, blown away by Ireland, and again here with Italy. And yes, they're ill-disciplined. So, yeah, look, to me, Italy, they've got many opportunities. They've got to take them. But like it's that point where you go.
Well, the under-18s team beat the French under-18s team. So there's a new generation. There's the next generation coming through. Exactly, they're building well. It's then translating that to success at the top level, which is the real challenge.
Definitely. And around the grounds, Italy, Ireland, the charge continues. They beat Wales.
Yeah.
This is the thing. You look at France in the World Cup and you look at Ireland at the World Cup. Ireland are still taking the step in the right direction, if you know what I mean. Like Ireland, this is the same Ireland team we've always known. Like someone put in a comment on our last breakdown of the first two games that we disrespected Ireland, which we probably did a little because we didn't talk much about them. But the reason we're not talking about them is this is what we expect from Ireland now. Like,
yeah, exactly. I have standard.
I have no doubt now. After they beat France, I said this game's going to come down to that last Scotland game, and it might not even matter with the way they're running through teams and bonus points. I don't see Ireland losing. I just go, this Irish team is built different now. This Irish team reminds me a lot of those early 2010s New Zealand teams where they just win games, they dominate you, they play their style, and that's what I'm seeing from this Ireland team. So they did it again against Wales. Wales tackled their hearts out. Again, another Gatlin-like performance, but Ireland roll on the hunt for a Six Nations Grand Slam.
Exactly. It could be another one for them. Look, and we come to our final game. We had Scotland beating England once more in a great game, cracking game. I think that's going to be Ireland's greatest challenge. This Six Nations is that Scotland game. You know, England have been. It's you know they've won two games, but they've won against Italy and Wales, and they weren't bad against Scotland, but they coming into now their toughest game. And I just don't think that I think they're just. This is definitely a transition year for them. This is not a year that they are going to be, a top team, a world-beating team. This is where they're, last year was moving on from 80 and scrambling to compete in a World Cup. This year is about, okay, what's our plan for the upcoming years? Who are our players that we're going to send on the British and Irish Lions tour? Build towards the next World Cup.
Totally.
And so that's what they're doing this year. And I think that's I think that's just what England's just going to have to suffer a little bit through is, moving on from some of their old stalwarts and moving into bringing on some newer, younger talent.
Yeah, I agree. I think they again weren't bad against Scotland. They have moments, but they haven't. They're lacking polish at the moment, and I think it's going to take a year or two under Borthwick to find that polish. So, look, I'm excited for where England rugby is heading. I think they're heading in the right direction under Borthwick. They've just got to find it. For Scotland, it's going to annoy the fuck out of me because I predicted this tournament to go this way. I said if that try against France was allowed. And Scotland, win again against, I think they've got Italy next week. Ireland win against England. We were down for the arguably going to be the biggest game in the Six Nations. Could have been the biggest international game this year. Scotland against Ireland in Ireland for the Six Nations and a Grand Slam. And now we don't get that. It's heartbreaking. But Scotland looking good again. Scotland's Duhan Vermeulen is just a beast.
Yeah.
No, it's not Duhan Vermeulen. It's Duhan Van der Merwe.
I knew who you meant.
Scoring a hat-trick.
3 tries, yeah.
So, look, Scotland looking good. They need England to help them out now and beat Ireland, which is very unrealistic.
Very unlikely.
But if they can hold them to a non-bonus points, then it'll come down to some calculations. But I still think Ireland run away with this.
I think England could finish the Six Nations 3 wins, 2 losses. I think they've got a very realistic chance of beating France.
Oh, 100%. The way France is looking, they might not win another game. I don't know who they've got next. I think they've got Wales.
They got Wales next. In Wales, I believe. Yes, Millennium Stadium. And then they finish off against England in France.
Yeah, so look, France, they've got a couple of games for France to right their wrongs and prove us especially wrong. But for now, not looking good. But that is our Six Nations Week 3 review by the Sports Booth.
The Australian number 10 jersey was a saga that's carried over from 2023 into 2024. New Wallabies coach. Nothing is set in terms of the Wallabies squad for this year. Joe Schmidt going to be keeping a very close eye on the Super Rugby, which kicked off this past week, and a few classy performances from some young number 10s in the Australian Super Rugby teams, and a few not so great performances. Two that stood out to me were Noah Lolesio coming back in, looking refreshed, revitalised after a stint in France, and Tom Linner for the Queensland Reds, who the Reds, I think, safe to say, they impressed. They definitely impressed me in their game against the Waratahs, and I didn't think the Waratahs actually looked that bad in that game either. With a last minute change in their backline, and we'll come on to that in the next segment. But then we've got our remaining 10s. Got Ben Donaldson, who is technically the incumbent 10 for the Wallabies, who just didn't. The Western Force all over seemed disjointed, which is not to be unexpected with a new 9 and a new 10 in their ranks. Carter Gordon had some moments, but overall looked the same as he did at the start of 2023. So it doesn't look like there's been, I would say, it hasn't been movement. The dial hasn't moved upwards like we would have thought. But again, I feel really bad for Carter Gordon because every situation he's been thrown in has been just a pile of shit, to be honest. You know, he was thrown into the fire for the Wallabies under a coach that we're looking at. This documentary coming out about the Wallabies in the World Cup just looks like a old man with dementia. He's with cattle prods and just all sorts of weird things. And it's like, this doesn't look like rugby. This looks like a motivational speech. Now he's with the Rebels, who are in external administration and are likely not to survive past this season. CEO gone, players uncertain about their future. It's like the damage that must be being done to this young man and his confidence in thinking, where am I going to be playing next year? Who knows? Tane Edmed for the Waratahs, I think looked all right, but was definitely outclassed by his opposite number. I think he's a pretty middle of the pack kind of guy. We're waiting to see if the dial, like Carter Gordon, we're waiting to see if the dial will tick upwards or not. It's not looking like it at the moment. So I think the Brumbies and the Reds, their 10s are definitely in the driver's seat at the moment for the Wallabies starting 10 jersey. And for my mind, I think Noah Lolesio, just because he has previous Wallaby experience, is probably the leading candidate at this stage, in my mind anyway.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting group, isn't it? It's a young group, which is, to me, is actually really good for Australian rugby because for so long we kind of had that question. And as you mentioned, who is the Wallabies 10? I kind of jumped in there for a bit. There was kind of movement. You had Foley, Cooper, all these overseas players. You've got 5, I would say, international 10s playing in Super Rugby.
They're
capable of playing international rugby. At the moment, playing in your Super Rugby teams. I think, obviously, Noah Lolesio, like you said, is going to benefit hugely from his time in Toulon and the tutelage under Larkham, just being able to learn from Larkham, huge. Carter Gordon had one of his best seasons last year. Started off the way he was playing for the Wallabies, which is missing goal kicks, missing touch and stuff like that. Needs to get back to his best. But as I said in my roundup of the week for Super Rugby, the Rebels were a fucking mess. Linner I thought was really good as well. Like you said, I think benefits from a lot of experience around him. Tate McDermott being his 9 is a big help when you've got a player of that level. Donaldson, like you said, we all know his talent. We've seen it. We've seen him guide the Waratahs to a final series. He's got a job to do now. If he wants to keep himself in that 10 jersey in the Wallabies, he needs to do a lot more. Like, he did not play well on the weekend, I didn't think. And then Edmed, like you said, this is his first real season uncontested from Donaldson, and he's got an opportunity to put his hand up and take the reins. And there's been a lot of talk in Sydney about him and this and that, about how good he actually is. He's got to come through. But 5 really good young 10s, which I think is the building block. You need depth. You need players who are willing to put their hands up. It's not just Noah Lolosio now. If you know, like, you know what, Ghetto Law, and when it was Cooper and Lolosio, or it was just Lolosio and Foley and this and that. Now it's 5 guys who Lolosio has to go out there and perform every week. He has to perform the way he did against the Rebels every single week, or Lynn will be on his shoulder, or Donaldson has a good game and stuff like this. To me, it's about consistency. So which one of these 5 can show us that they are the most consistent over these 5 games? All 5 of them arguably have good teams and a solid 4-pack around them. I watched the Rebels and the Brumbies game. Brumbies 4-pack's unreal. Rebels 4-pack should be really good. Didn't play well. Lynette, the Reds 4-pack's monstrous, along with the New South Wales one, which is also not a bad 4-pack. And then you've got the Force, who can dominate in the 4-pack, struggle against the Canes mightily, but there's some potential there. So I go, they've got enough around them to perform. Who's going to be the most consistent and take that 10 jersey and make it theirs? It'll be interesting to see how the season plays out. I think, just quickly as well, I think Joe Schmidt will be absolutely loving that Les Kiss is coaching the Queensland Reds, because the way they played against you fellas, I was just like, holy shit, like the amount of points they turned down to go for kicks or corners. And again, I thought Lynn was very good at that and just controlling the game. I just went, Les Kiss, welcome to Australian rugby. I think Australian rugby will be a lot better off with Les Kiss coaching there. So, look, I'm going to put you on the spot now. You've said Noah Lolosio as your early 10, but I want to know 10 for the British and Irish Lions and 10 for the Rugby World Cup. Now, we're only choosing these 5. I know it's harsh because there could be a youngster coming through now who arguably is going to be better than all of these guys. But out of these 5, what are you looking at?
Lina has had one game. I think Noah actually had a pretty solid 2023 in retrospect, sort of looking back on it. He was just, I think confidence was more his thing than anything else. And I think his stint in Toulon has done really well for him. For me, I'm going, unlike the Rugby World Cup, I think we're going to carry probably more than 110 on our roster. So I would say Noah is the starter for both, and Lina at this stage is the backup. I think Carter Gordon, from just, we're going off this one game here, so it's a one game overreaction. And so this one game, I think Carter Gordon needs to step. I think 2024 Carter Gordon is 2023 Noah Lolosio. Needs to step up to the plate to earn his spot back in the team. And I think he'll have an easier time of doing it because the Wallabies coach isn't threatening people with cattle prods this year.
I also think for Carter Gordon, and it's not, I think, say the Rebels do dissolve, if a year or 2 overseas wouldn't go amiss for a player like Carter Gordon, a year or 2 in Europe, somewhere in France or in England, I think, and
love
then
to
come
see him
back.
in a Waratahs jersey, to be honest.
Well, there you go as well.
Why travel that far? Yeah.
But we look at players that have gone overseas from the Wallabies. You look at Nick White, you look at Dave Parecchia, the 2 big standouts. Sometimes it does help. Like, it definitely does help.
Will Skelton.
Will Skelton again, if he was to come, like, I'm hoping that the idea is that they come back and they play in a Super Rugby jersey, but it's not something where I think if Carter Gordon signed like a 2-year deal, could play good rugby, get his confidence up, come back into a Super Rugby jersey, he could be a gun. So, look, interesting time for that Wallabies 10 jersey. Super Rugby's back, and with that, it's a bit of Australian versus New Zealand battles going on. I just wanted to discuss, look, I was lucky enough to watch every game bar the Blues versus Zurura, just because that was too early for London time. Yep. But I'm interested. There's a couple of Aussies teams that did stand out, and it's the usual Brumbies, and the Reds really stood out for me. But I watched the Hurricanes and Force game, obviously, and watched that one very closely because Hurricanes are my team. But I just sat there and I go, watching the Rebels and the Force, and I go, even the Tars, I go, I don't think they're up to scratch with New Zealand Super Rugby side yet again. I believe the Brumbies, even with their performance, I didn't think it was that good. I think the Brumbies can beat some teams. I don't think on that day they would have beaten teams. I think that's how bad the Rebels were. But I really, the team that stood out the most for me were the Reds. I go,
yeah.
If there's a team that funnily enough, the Hurricanes come up against the Reds next. If there's a team I fear the most, and I'm glad we're getting them early season, it's the Reds, because I think under Lescas, what he's going to do with those teams is beat a couple of New Zealand teams, and I think really push the Super Rugby spectrum in a different direction.
It is Super Round this upcoming week, so you get them in it's a neutral venue as well. Look, for me, the Reds, I think what was provided to them was some stability, particularly in two of their key players being Hunter Paisami and Jordan Pataya. Now, with Jordan Pataya, he has been flipped positions his entire career. One of the things that I love is that Les Kiz has just said he's a 15, he's staying in the 15 jersey, go make some plays in the 15 jersey. And he did. He has natural talent and he unleashed that talent. I was very critical of Pataya last year, and I think deservedly so. He did not play very well in the Wallabies jersey at the outside centre position. I think his decision-making from that position was not great. Maybe fullback is his position. I have been calling for him to be a fullback, though. I said that's probably his more natural position. Yeah, and so I'm very happy to see him performing well in that fullback position. Hunter Paisami looked so much better than I've seen him in the last couple of years. He was back to that heat-seeking missile form that we grew to love in a couple of years back. Just absolutely transformed from. Last year was just sort of a very down year for him. I don't know why, but whatever Les Kiz has brought to the Reds, those two were the players that stood out the most for me when I was watching that game. Anytime Izzy Parisi got the ball, Paisami was on him like a flash. Mm-hmm. And it's great because, those guys are Wallabies teammates as well. They know each other well. And it's one of those ones where it's like when you're playing your mate and it's like, I'm just going to wallop you because I know I can rub it in the group chat later type thing. Yep. So it was great to see that. The Reds just overall looked really good. They did look really, really good. The Brumbies, it's sort of a thing like, they're playing the Rebels. The Waratahs, I feel a little bit sorry for them because I think their week was pretty well disrupted when Lalakai Foketi went to hospital with a neck injury. Thankfully cleared of all major issues. Will be back this season. Just some rehab. Hopefully he's back. And I think he's one of the Wallabies. He is one of the Wallabies, but also one of the Waratahs' key pieces. And he's an excellent player when he's out there. I think Joey Walton actually did quite a good job standing in there, going from the 15 jersey to the 12. Again, a bit of an odd decision to have, Darren Coleman's initial decision was to have Walton start the 15 and Jorgensen come off the bench or something. And it's just a very overall strange look there. Thought Angus Bell looked tremendous as always. Just immense carrier of the ball. I think this comes down to a very similar thing as we've said about Australian versus New Zealand Super Rugby. I think Australia's got the ability to put a competitive 23-man team on the field, but it's whether there's enough talent to spread out through all the Super Rugby teams to match the New Zealand Super Rugby teams on a consistent basis. Probably not. And this is again why we call for two conferences and probably to split the Super Rugby and then to meet at the end of the season in a final series. All sorts of options there. But coming into the Super Round, let's look at some of the matchups we got. Crusaders versus Waratahs, right? Crusaders who mounted that epic comeback against the Chiefs and just fell short after the Chiefs looked like they were going to absolutely slaughter them. So the Crusaders probably going to take that one over the Waratahs. You got the Chiefs versus the Brumbies. That is going to be a great game. Arguably the two best teams in their respective conferences going at it. And then the Hurricanes versus Reds, two of the teams that are looking to compete for that top spot in their respective countries. Let's see how they do up against each other. In all three cases, you'd say that the New Zealand team is favored. I think if any of those Australian teams win, it's going to be an upset. And that is an issue. It shouldn't be like that. We should be hearkening, 10 years ago, the Waratahs won the Super Rugby competition and they were the number 1 seed that year. How flabbergasted would we be if an Australian team was to be the number 1 seed this year? I think it is just there's clearly been the degradation, but of the Australian competition, and the New Zealand competition has maintained a standard of excellence that the Australian system isn't matching. And there's a lot of chat about consolidating talent with the Rebels potentially folding. Look, it's going to be really tough. This next year and a bit for Super Rugby and navigating the difficulties is going to be really difficult. And how the Super Rugby competition and Australian rugby in particular navigate it is really going to make the difference in how we see this competition. But for the near future, I think it is pretty well set that New Zealand teams, with the exception of maybe the Highlanders, hold an advantage over the Australian teams.
Totally, yeah. I'm interested. Look, I'm always been a fan of keeping 5 Australian teams. But if one was to dissolve, let's say the Rebels do dissolve, and it's due to money woes and everything like that, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing for Super Rugby or Australian rugby. I look at it and I go, let's take this Super Rugby team in Melbourne, let's look at all the players and let's go, okay, Callaway now in the Waratahs. We know he's already signing for the Waratahs, but in a Waratahs jersey. We go Taliona Tupou back in a Reds jersey or whatever. Again, some of that talent spreads out to the force, and all of a sudden you've got 4 pretty damn strong teams rather than 5 slightly spread out teams. You know what I mean? Like Rob Leota goes and plays. And again, you hate the idea of losing the Melbourne Rebels, but as long as there's a pathway, and I think there will be,
that's the big thing. Yeah.
You could still have a pathway and say, hey, from Melbourne, you will set up like a Melbourne Academy, and players then get signed out to Super Rugby clubs around Australia. You'd sort out some way. There will still be talent coming out of there. We've talked about it. Rob Valentini, Rob Leota, both Melbourne born or Melbourne raised at least, and Melbourneites, and want to be playing for Melbourne. But if there's no team there, they will, look, as you can see with Valentini, go and kill it for the Brumbies. And I just go, I think it wouldn't be the worst thing for Australian rugby, especially if we bring the Aguares back. There's 12 teams there. You have 4 teams there. I think it could work. I think as much as I don't want it, I think it just might be the necessary step.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I think you need to maintain that pathways from Melbourne, and that's going to be really tough to do. I don't know what the answer is, but this is why the Rugby Australia board and CEO are paid the big bucks to make these decisions. And I think simply just folding a team is not the only answer. You have to have something that promises for the future. Not just minimizes the losses for now, but needs promise for the future.
Yeah, I agree. There's got to be something in play, but I agree. There needs to be something in play. I don't know what it is, and I'll be interesting to see what Australian rugby comes up with if in doubt. Like, if they do go, look, there's too much money in doubt here. We can't do this anymore. What the plan is, but yeah, I just think, like you said, no Australian team in my mind can go in as a favourite for a season, as in to finish top of the table that season with the 5 current teams you have. Like, I think if you put out a near Wallabies team, that is the only way you'd get a favourite. If the Wallabies went out there and played, then you'd be like, okay, this team is probably favourites. Yeah, look, lots going on in Super Rugby at the moment, and as you said, a big Super round coming up with teams cross country playing, as we only saw one cross country game really, but very exciting times ahead. We will keep you up to date with everything going on in the rugby world, and we'll be back again next week to discuss all in Super Rugby and Six Nations Rugby. Thank you for joining us. If you did like this episode of That Rugby Podcast, make sure to like and subscribe. We will be back again next time. See ya.
Peace.